Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is September 25th. On this day in 1985 in West Los Angeles, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, had just come to a close. Families had fasted, prayed, and reflected, and now they were sitting down together to break the fast. For most, it was a night of forgiveness, of family, and of peace. But for Gerald and Vera Woodman, that night of peace would end in horror. Today, we're talking about one of the most infamous family tragedies in Los Angeles history, the murders of Gerald and Vera Woodman. It's a case that shocked the city, tore a family apart, and revealed a betrayal so deep that it's hard to fathom. Let's get started. Gerald Woodman had come to America in the 1940s. He was an immigrant who worked hard to build a new life. Eventually, he started a plastics business in Los Angeles called Manchester Products. It wasn't glamorous, but it was successful, and it supported his family. Gerald's sons, Neil and Stuart, grew up working alongside their father in the company. For a time, it looked like the Woodmans had everything: stability, tradition, and a sense of pride in what they had built together. Gerald's wife, Vera, was at the heart of that family. She was 63 years old in 1985 and was devoted to her children and her community. For her, holidays like Yom Kippur were about more than just ritual. They were about family togetherness. That year, as usual, Gerald and Vera spent the evening at Vera's sister's house, breaking the fast surrounded by relatives. But beneath that warm family surface, cracks had begun to form. By the mid-'80s, Manchester Products was struggling. Competition was fierce, their debts were mounting, and Gerald's once solid relationship with his sons had unraveled. Instead of working together, they were fighting. They were suing each other, cutting each other off, and in some cases, humiliating one another publicly. One particularly painful moment came when Neil, one of the sons, hired security guards to physically keep his parents out of his own son's bar mitzvah. That's how deep the divide had gotten. And of course, there was also money involved, a serious amount of money. There was not only the business, but Vera also had a life insurance policy that was worth about $500,000, which in 1985 was not chump change. That policy would later become a key piece in understanding why anyone would have wanted Gerald and Vera dead. So while the couple prayed and reflected on Yom Kippur, they had no idea that the true danger they faced wasn't from outside the family, but from within. It was just after sundown on September 25th when Gerald and Vera pulled their tan Mercedes into the underground garage of their Brentwood condominium. Neighbors later reported hearing 2 gunshots. Then there was a pause. It was just long enough for people to begin wondering if they actually heard what they thought they had heard. And then 3 more shots rang out. One neighbor peered out from a balcony and saw a figure sprinting away from the garage. The person was dressed head to toe in black with a hood pulled up. The clothing concealed so much that the press soon gave the killer a nickname, the Ninja. When police arrived, they found a gruesome scene. Gerald was still in the driver's seat, slumped over the steering wheel. He'd been shot twice in the chest. Vera had managed to get out of the car, but she didn't get far. She was shot 3 times just outside of the vehicle. What immediately stood out to detectives was what hadn't been touched. Gerald still had cash and credit cards in his pocket. Vera was still wearing her jewelry. Nothing had been taken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was something else entirely. And then there was the chain link gate to the garage. It had been deliberately cut open. Later, those cut marks would be matched to a pair of bolt cutters that the police found in a suspect's home. That was one of the first solid clues that this crime had been carefully planned. From the very beginning, investigators asked themselves, who would benefit from Gerald and Vera's deaths? Their sons, Neil and Stuart, quickly rose to the top of the suspect list. Their feud with their parents was no secret. Their financial motives weren't hard to see, and when detectives started digging deeper, the story only got darker. But the case soon led to two other brothers who weren't related to the Woodmans at all, Stephen and Robert Homick. Stephen had once been a police officer, but now the Homick brothers were suspected of being hired hitmen. Detectives believed that Neil and Stuart had paid them to carry out the ambush. The evidence against them piled up. Hardware store clerks remembered selling bolt cutters that were later linked to the crime scene. Walkie-talkies and payphones were traced back to the suspects, showing how they coordinated their movements. Witnesses placed men in dark clothing near the garage on the night of the murders. And then there was the travel trail. Stephen Homick had flown in from Las Vegas just one day before the killings, and detectives believed that it wasn't for a family visit. But it took nearly 5 years before they got their first major conviction. In 1990, Stuart Woodman was found guilty of first-degree murder for orchestrating the killings. He later testified against others involved, including his own brother. Neil's trial didn't happen until 1996, but when it did, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted him of murder and conspiracy. The Homick brothers were also brought to justice. Stephen, the former LAPD officer, was sentenced to death. His brother Robert received life without parole. When all was said and done, the trials had dragged on for over a decade, but by the mid-90s, the truth was out. Gerald and Vera hadn't been the victims of some random ninja prowling the streets of LA. They had been killed as part of a calculated plan that had been hatched by their own children. The press called it the Ninja Murders, but that nickname almost trivializes the horror. What really shocked Los Angeles wasn't the method, but the betrayal. The idea that children could order the deaths of their own parents for money and control of a struggling business. As for the people at the center of it, Stephen Homick died in 2014 of natural causes while on death row. Stuart Woodman also died in prison that same year after battling diabetes. Robert Homick and Neil Woodman remain incarcerated. On September 25, 1985, Gerald and Vera Woodman drove home from a Yom Kippur dinner, likely feeling full and reflective, maybe even hopeful about the new year ahead. They had no way of knowing that in their own garage, assassins were waiting. The truth that their own sons had ordered their deaths would take years to come out, and when it did, it left behind not just shock, but heartbreak, and the sobering reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from the people closest to us. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe, and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!